Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku's Quirk was alive and wanted to destroy him. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air in Gamma Gym was thick with the scent of ozone, sweat, and superheated concrete. It was the smell of progress, a perfume Izuku Midoriya had come to associate with the burning in his muscles and the frantic, joyful beat of his heart. Today was a good day. The familiar, warm crackle of One for All hummed beneath his skin like a friendly current, a universe of power that was, slowly, painstakingly, becoming an extension of his own will. Alright, Midoriya, that's enough with the foundational drills. Aizawa's voice, dry as sandpaper, echoed from the observation deck. Let's move on to integrated application. Rescue scenario. Ida, you're the civilian anchor. Uraraka, you're on debris clearing and primary rescue. Midoriya, you're secondary support and high-threat neutralization. A simulated villain construct will activate in 30 seconds. Your objective is to secure the anchor and clear the field without destabilizing the structure. Go. A grin touched Izuku's lips. This was what he lived for. He exchanged a determined nod with Uraraka, her brown eyes bright with focus, and gave a thumbs up to Ida, who was already strapping himself into the designated civilian harness near a precarious stack of concrete slabs. I have complete faith in your abilities, Ida announced, his voice booming with its usual earnest formality. Proceed with maximum efficiency and care. You got it, Ida. Uraraka called back, pressing her fingertips together. Izuku took his position, falling into a low crouch. He let the power of One for All swell within him, capping it at a comfortable, controllable 8%. Green lightning, now a familiar sight, danced around his limbs. He could feel the other quirks nestled within the core of OFA, coiled and waiting. FA Gene was a tightly wound spring, smokescreen a nebulous cloud, and Black Whip. Black Whip was a living, writhing thing, eager and restless. It was the one he'd been focusing on for weeks, trying to tame its wild, lashing tendencies into something precise and useful. Okay, focus, he told himself, his eyes scanning the training ground. Aizawa-sensei said integration? That means using them together. I can use float to get a better vantage point, then Black Whip to stabilize the larger pieces for Uraraka-san. Construct activating. Aizawa's voice droned. From a hidden panel in the floor, a hulking automaton of scrap metal and reinforced plating rose with a hydraulic hiss. It was designed to be unpredictable, its limbs flailing with programmed chaos to simulate a rampaging villain. It immediately swung a massive pylon arm toward Ida's position. I'm on it! Uraraka shouted, slapping her palms on two large chunks of rubble in the construct's path. They glowed pink and lifted gracefully, forming a temporary shield. Izuku's mind was racing, cataloging variables, running probabilities. This was his element. The notebooks, the years of analysis, it all converged in these moments. He saw an opening. A large girder was teetering above the main pile, threatening to collapse the entire structure if the construct hit it. Uraraka-san, the girder at 10 o'clock. I'll secure it, he yelled. Got it. He pushed off the ground, a flicker of float giving him an extra 5 feet of air. As he soared, he extended his right arm, focusing his will. Black Whip! From his arm, tendrils of dark, vibrant energy erupted. They were more solid today, less like chaotic ink spills and more like disciplined cords. They shot through the air, wrapping securely around the rusted girder. He landed, digging his heels in, the muscles in his back and shoulders straining as he became a living anchor. The familiar warmth of OFA surged to meet the demand, reinforcing his body. It was working. It was all working. The synergy was there. He could feel the quiet pride of the vestiges within him, a low, encouraging hum. He held the girder steady while Uraraka cleared the smaller debris from Ida's path. The construct, thwarted, turned its attention to Izuku. Good. Keep its focus on me. He held Black Whip with one hand, his mind already calculating his next move. Shoot style. A quick blast at its knee joint should be enough to disable its leg, giving them the window they needed. But he could be faster. He could be stronger. The thought came, unbidden and sharp. This is too slow. Too careful. He shook his head, dismissing it. Careful was the point. Control was the goal. The construct lumbered closer, raising a flattened sheet of metal like a club. He had a clear shot. Uraraka had almost reached Ida. Just a few more seconds. He needed to hold the girder and create a diversion. He needed just a little more power for Black Whip, to pull the girder slightly further away from the main pile, to create a safer zone. He dug deep into the wellspring of One for All. He reached for that familiar, empowering warmth, asking for just a bit more, maybe a jump from 8% to 12% in his arm to reinforce the tendrils. But what answered his call was not warm. It was ice. A sudden, terrifying, and utterly alien cold that flooded his senses from the inside out. It didn't feel like his power. It felt like a violation, a hostile takeover of his own circulatory system. The green lightning flickering around him stuttered, flaring with a sickly, venomous hue, and with the cold came a feeling. It wasn't his. It was a surge of raw, predatory emotion that bloomed in his chest, a flicker of malevolent glee. It was the elation of a wolf finally let off its leash, a dark, triumphant joy at the prospect of pure, unrestrained destruction. His eyes widened in horror. What is that? Before he could process the foreign emotion, his quirk ripped itself from his control. The Black Whip tendrils, once disciplined cords, swelled to the thickness of pythons. They didn't just hold the girder anymore, they constricted. With a groan of protesting metal, the thick steel girder began to buckle, bending as if it were cheap plastic. Midoriya, what are you doing? Aizawa's voice was a whip crack of alarm. Izuku couldn't answer. He was a prisoner, in his own body. The tendrils holding the girder suddenly retracted at impossible speed, not pulling it to safety, but yanking it free from the ceiling struts. Then they lashed out. It was a single, fluid, horrifying motion. The massive girder, now a colossal flail, swung through the air on the end of his black whip. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. He saw Uraraka, her back to him, reaching for Ida's harness. She was directly in the girder's path. A scream was trapped in his throat, choked by the icy grip on his quirk. No! No! Stop! His silent, desperate plea was ignored. The glee in his chest intensified, reveling in the impending impact. At the last possible fraction of a second, something in him snapped. A primal fear, a desperate love for his friend, erupted from the core of his being. He threw every ounce of his own will against the invading cold, fighting for control. For a millisecond he got it. The trajectory of the whip-like tendrils shifted, jerking violently upward. The girder didn't hit Uraraka. Instead, it slammed into the reinforced concrete wall of the gym just a few feet to her left. The impact was cataclysmic. A deafening boom echoed through the cavernous space, a sound of pure kinetic violence. Concrete exploded outward, and the wall, a foot of solid, hero-grade material, was savaged. When the dust settled, a deep, jagged scar, 10 feet long and terrifyingly deep, was gouged into its surface. A spiderweb of cracks radiated out from it, a permanent testament to the brutal force that had been unleashed. The black whip tendrils dissolved, vanishing back into his arm. The icy presence receded, not disappearing entirely, but retreating back into the depths of his quirk, leaving behind a chilling residue. The malevolent glee vanished, replaced by the ghost of a satisfied purr. Silence descended. It was a heavy, ringing silence, broken only by the faint trickle of dust and pebbles from the ruined wall. Uraraka was frozen, her hand hovering inches from Ida. She slowly turned, her face pale, her eyes wide with shock as she stared at the raw devastation next to her. She looked from the wall to Izuku, a question and a flicker of fear in her gaze. Ida, still harnessed, looked equally stunned. Izuku stood trembling, his arm hanging limply at his side. The warmth of Ofa was gone, replaced by a deep, throbbing ache that was more than just physical. He stared at his hand, at the limb that had just acted with such murderous intent. Training exercise terminated. Aizawa's voice cut through the silence, sharp and devoid of any emotion. Everyone, clear the field. Midoriya, stay where you are. The walk back to the Heights Alliance dorms was a study in quiet misery. After a tense debriefing where Aizawa had grilled him on his loss of control, a lecture Izuku had barely registered, his mind still reeling, He was dismissed with a stern warning about recklessness. All Might had been there, too, his skeletal face etched with concern. He had placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder, his voice a low rumble. Young Midoriya, one for all is a tempest. There will be times it threatens to overwhelm you. We knew this. Do not let one slip define you. You corrected it. That is what matters, but it wasn't a slip. It was a hijacking. And he hadn't corrected it. He had barely managed to nudge it. The distinction was a screaming chasm in his mind. He walked with Uraraka and Ida, the three of them forming their usual triangle, but the space between them felt miles wide. Are you okay, Deku-kun? Uraraka asked, her voice soft. She kept glancing at him, then at the gash on the wall, as if trying to reconcile the two. That was really intense. I am so sorry, Uraraka-san. Izuku stammered, his voice hoarse. He couldn't look at her. The image of the girder swinging toward her was burned into the back of his eyelids. I don't know what happened. The power, it surged. It is understandable, Midoriya-kun. Ida interjected, chopping the air with his hand, though his movements lacked their usual crispness. The vestiges within One for All are a new and powerful variable. A momentary lapse in concentration resulting in an overexertion of force is a logical, if dangerous, outcome. The important thing is that your heroic instincts redirected the blow. They were trying to comfort him. They were being good friends. And every kind word was another twist of the knife, because they didn't understand. They couldn't. How could he explain it? My quirk felt happy that it almost killed you. It enjoyed it. He sounded insane. He felt insane. The cold feeling lingered in his right arm, a faint, phantom chill under the skin, a constant reminder of the alien presence nesting within him. They reached the common room. The comforting aroma of Sato's baking usually made Izuku's stomach rumble, but today it just turned it to lead. Kirishima and Kaminari were laughing loudly over a video game on the couch. Yaoyorozu was helping Ishido with some complex homework at the main table. It was a scene of perfect, boisterous domesticity. A family. Izuku saw it all through a haze of fear. He saw the laughing faces, the easy camaraderie, and all he could think about was the glee. That dark, joyful pulse that had wanted to shatter this peace. Hey, Midoriya! You guys are back! How was the new training? Kirishima called out, pausing his game. Izuku flinched. He couldn't find his voice. It was instructive, Ida supplied tactfully. Uraraka shot Izuku another worried look. Deku-kun, you should probably go lie down. You look really pale. He latched onto the excuse like a drowning man to a life raft. Yeah. I think I will. I'm just really tired. He mumbled a hasty goodbye and fled, ignoring the concerned calls of his classmates. He practically ran up the stairs, his heart pounding a frantic, terrified rhythm against his ribs. He didn't stop until he was in his room, the door clicking shut behind him, sealing him in with his All Might posters and his fear. He sank onto his bed, his body trembling. He stared at his hero analysis journals, neatly stacked on his desk. His whole life, he had chased power. He had craved it, dreamed of it, wept for the lack of it. It was the only way he could become a hero, the only way he could save people with a smile, like All Might. But the power he now held, it had its own desires. And those desires were a nightmare. Hours passed. The sun set, bathing his room in the deep orange and purple hues of twilight before surrendering to darkness. The muffled sounds of his friends in the common room, laughter, the TV, the occasional shout, faded as they, one by one, retired to their own rooms. Soon, the only sound was the hum of the dorm's ventilation and the frantic beating of his own heart. He hadn't moved from his bed. He'd skipped dinner. The thought of facing anyone, of pretending everything was normal, was impossible. He finally forced himself up, his muscles stiff, and went to his small dorm bathroom to splash cold water on his face. He looked a wreck. His eyes were bloodshot, his skin clammy. He returned to his main room and began to pace, a caged animal in a room papered with the symbols of his dream. He needed to rationalize this. It was stress. It had to be. He'd been pushing himself too hard, trying to master 7 quirks at once on top of his regular studies. All Might said it himself, the Quirk was a tempest. It was just a particularly big wave today. It was a fluke. A one-time surge. It was just a fluke, he repeated to himself, the words a desperate mantra. It won't happen again. He stopped pacing and went to his desk, grabbing the ice pack he kept in his mini-fridge. His arm was still throbbing, a deep, resonant ache. He sat on the edge of his bed, pressing the cold pack to his bicep, the sharp chill a welcome distraction. The room was silent. Utterly, profoundly silent. The kind of silence that amplifies every tiny noise, the creak of the building, the whisper of the wind against his windowpane, the rush of blood in his own ears. It was in that deep, oppressive quiet that he heard it. It was faint, so faint he almost missed it. A whisper, curling at the very edge of his hearing. He froze, his breath catching in his lungs. He slowly lowered the ice pack, straining to listen. There was nothing. Just the wind. I'm imagining things. I'm exhausted. It's my brain playing tricks on me. He took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to calm his racing heart. He closed his eyes, focusing on the cold on his arm, the solid reality of the bed beneath him, and then he heard it again. Closer this time. Not in the room, but in his head. It was a sound that was both intimate and horrifyingly wrong, a distorted, warped echo of his own voice, as if it were being filtered through static and malice. Weak. The word was a drop of acid in the silence of his mind. It was filled with a chilling, contemptuous disappointment. Izuku's eyes snapped open. He scrambled off the bed, his back hitting the wall with a soft thud. He looked wildly around the empty room, his gaze darting into the shadowed corners, under the desk, toward the closet. "Who's there?" he whispered, his voice trembling. Silence was his only answer. The logical part of his brain was screaming at him. There's no one here. You're alone. It's psychological. Auditory hallucination brought on by extreme stress. But his gut, his instincts, knew better. This felt real. It felt as real as the cold presence he'd felt in the gym. He pushed himself along the wall, his heart hammering against his ribcage like a trapped bird. He was hyperventilating, his breaths coming in short, sharp gasps. Okay. Calm down, Izuku. Calm down. You're a hero. You face villains. You're not afraid of a sound. He tried to steady himself, planting his feet. He forced himself to take a slow, deep breath. And another. The panic began to recede, replaced by a fragile, shaky composure. It was just my imagination, he told himself, the mantra now feeling thin and pathetic. I'm just stressed from the incident. That's all, the voice answered, laced with a sneering amusement that made his blood run cold. It was clearer now, a venomous current flowing directly into his consciousness. You're holding us back. The us shattered his last defense. This wasn't just a voice. It was a consciousness. A consciousness that saw itself as linked to him, shackled to him. A partner that found him wanting. The voice of the glee. The voice of the ice. A wave of nausea and vertigo washed over him. He stumbled toward his desk, gripping its edge to keep from falling. His reflection stared back at him from the dark glass of his window, a pale, terrified silhouette against the faint lights of the campus beyond. He stared at his own face, at the wide, fearful green eyes. He tried to see the hero everyone else saw. He tried to see All Might's successor, but all he saw was a scared kid, a boy who was nothing without the power he had been given. A power that was now turning on him. Weak, the voice whispered again, a soft, insidious confirmation of his deepest, most guarded insecurity. The one Bakugo had branded onto his soul for a decade. The one he thought he had finally started to conquer. He squeezed his eyes shut. Go away. You're not real. He kept them shut for a long time, maybe a full minute, praying that when he opened them, the nightmare would be over. That the voice would be gone, and this would all be a bad dream. Finally, he slowly opened his eyes, his gaze locking back onto his reflection in the dark window. For one horrifying, heart-stopping second, it wasn't his reflection. The face looking back at him was his, yes, his messy green hair, his freckles, his features. But the expression was a grotesque mockery. His eyes, were not filled with fear. They were glowing with the same venomous, sickly green light from the gym, burning with an ancient, predatory intelligence. And his mouth, was twisted into a smile. It was a terrible thing, that smile. It was slow, cruel, and utterly confident. It was a predator's smile, full of contempt and the promise of violence. It was the smile of a master looking at a tool it was about to break. Izuku's heart stopped. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't move. He could only stare in abject terror at the monster wearing his face. He blinked, and it was gone. The glow in the eyes vanished. The cruel smile was replaced by his own horrified, slack-jawed expression. It was just him again. Just Izuku Midoriya, a scared teenager, reflected in a dark window, but the image was seared into his brain. The cold dread that had been a seed was now a colossal, thorny vine, wrapping around his heart and squeezing. He stumbled back, his legs giving out from under him, and collapsed onto the floor. He sat there, trembling uncontrollably, his back pressed against his bed. He wrapped his arms around himself, a futile attempt to hold his splintering reality together. It wasn't stress. It wasn't exhaustion. It was real. There was something alive inside his Quirk. Something ancient and powerful and cruel, and it wanted to destroy him. Sleep offered no escape. It was not a sanctuary, but another battlefield where Izuku was hopelessly outmatched. He would drift into an uneasy unconsciousness only to be jolted awake by the phantom sensation of a cruel smile stretching his own lips or the echo of a venomous whisper in the hollows of his mind. He'd sit bolt upright in the dark, heart hammering, drenched in a cold sweat that had nothing to do with the temperature of his room. He'd stare at his own hands, half expecting to see them glowing with that terrifying, sickly green light. The days that followed the incident in Gamma Gym were lived through a fog of exhaustion and gnawing dread. Dark, bruised circles formed under his eyes, a physical manifestation of the war being waged within him. He felt stretched thin, a frayed wire humming with a current it was never meant to carry. The voice, he had started thinking of it as Animus, a name that felt fittingly hostile and primal, was a constant companion now. It was no longer just an occasional whisper. It was a low, incessant murmur at the base of his skull, a parasitic commentary on his every thought and action. When he was in present mixed English class, trying to focus on verb conjugations, Animus would scoff. Pointless. Trivial. The language of heroes is not spoken in words but in power. Our power. Why do you waste time with this? When he sat in the cafeteria with Uraraka and Ida, forcing a strained smile as they chatted about an upcoming movie, Animus would drip poison into his ear. Look at them. So fragile. So blissfully unaware of the gods sitting in their midst. Her quirk is a novelty. His is simple locomotion. They are insects. You are the storm. He would have to physically clench his jaw to keep from shouting, to keep the internal argument from spilling into the real world. He'd stab at his katsudon with more force than necessary, the clatter of his chopsticks against the bowl earning him worried looks. Deku-kun? Are you feeling all right? Uraraka asked one lunchtime, her brow furrowed with genuine concern. You've seemed really wound up lately. He is exhibiting signs of severe sleep deprivation, Ida observed, his hand gesturing with sharp, analytical precision. Perhaps you should consult with Recovery Girl. A proper sleep schedule is paramount for peak heroic performance. I'm fine, guys, really. Izuku lied, the words tasting like ash. He forced a smile that felt like a painful grimace. Just a lot on my mind. Trying to get a handle on all the new quirks is a lot. I'm just tired. They accepted his excuse, but the worry in their eyes remained. It was a constant, gentle pressure, a helping hand he was terrified to take. How could he explain that the reason he was tired was because a malevolent entity living in his veins spent every waking and sleeping moment trying to convince him to view his friends as disposable stepping stones? He began to pull away. It was a subtle retreat at first. He'd make excuses to skip group study sessions, claiming he needed to focus on his own quirk analysis. He'd eat his meals quickly and retreat to the solitude of his room. The vibrant, bustling common room, once a source of comfort and belonging, now felt like a minefield. Every laugh, every friendly pat on the back, was a reminder of what he stood to lose, or worse, what he stood to break. Animus, of course, was delighted. The more he isolated himself, the louder its voice became, no longer needing to compete with the distractions of friendship. Good. It would hum, a sound like grinding stone deep in his mind. They are an anchor, holding you to the shallow waters. We are meant for the abyss. They are a weakness. We don't need them. The cold thrumming in his right arm had become a permanent fixture, a low-level vibration that served as a constant reminder of Animus's presence. Sometimes, he felt a strange pressure behind his eyes, as if something was looking out through them, evaluating the world with a cold, predatory calculus he did not share. It all came to a head a week after the first incident. Aizawa, ever the pragmatist, believed in facing problems head-on. Quirk control is a muscle, Midoriya, he'd said, his gaze sharp and unrelenting. You don't strengthen it by letting it atrophy. We're putting you back in combat drills. Today. Ground Beta. Your opponent is Bakugo. Izuku's blood ran cold. Bakugo. Of all people, it had to be Kaken. The one person whose opinion, despite everything, still burrowed under his skin. The one person who had been his lifelong barometer for strength. A vicious spike of excitement, not his own, shot through him. Animus was thrilled. Yes. The explosive one. He still thinks you are that worthless, quirkless Deku, crying in the dirt. He is the perfect whetstone upon which to sharpen our power. Break him. Show him what you have become. No. Izuku whispered aloud, so softly that no one could hear. He was standing with the rest of the class on the sidelines of Ground Beta, the sprawling cityscape a familiar sight. He clenched his fists, his knuckles white. I'm in control. Are you? Animus mocked. You couldn't even control a single girder. Midoriya. Bakugo. To the central plaza. Standard combat rules. The objective is to subdue your opponent via incapacitation or forcing a surrender. Begin when ready. Aizawa's voice crackled over the comms system. Izuku took a deep breath and walked toward the center of the plaza, his boots crunching on the dusty asphalt. Across from him, Bakugo was stretching his arms, a feral grin spreading across his face. It wasn't the usual sneer. It was a look of genuine, competitive hunger. Finally get to cut loose, Deku? Bakugo barked, his palms already starting to smoke. Don't you dare hold back, you damn nerd! After whatever the hell that was last week, you better show me what that borrowed power can really do. Izuku's stomach twisted. He wanted to scream that he was going to do the exact opposite. He was going to hold back so hard it hurt. He was going to chain down the beast inside him and prove, if only to himself, that he was still the one holding the leash. I'm ready, Kaken, he said, his voice steadier than he felt. He fell into his shoot-style stance, letting one for all flow through him. He capped it at 8%, a familiar, manageable level. Then, for added security, he mentally dialed it down to 5%. It felt like barely anything, a faint whisper of power. Pathetic, Animus hissed. You are bringing a fly swatter to a war. Shut up, Izuku thought, his focus narrowing entirely on Bakugo. The fight began with an explosion. Bakugo launched himself forward, a screaming projectile of orange and black. Izuku was ready. At 5%, his speed was reduced, but his mind wasn't. Years of analyzing Kaken's moves had hardwired his attack patterns into Izuku's brain. He dodged the right hook, the heat of the blast washing over him, and sidestepped the follow-up explosion from Bakugo's left palm. He was entirely on the defensive, a green blur weaving through a storm of detonations. He didn't throw a single punch, didn't launch a single kick. He just moved, his mind a whirlwind of calculations, his body a testament to his control. For a few frantic moments, it was working. He was proving it. He could hold the power back. A fragile seed of hope began to sprout in his chest. What's the matter, Deku? Bakugo roared, his frustration mounting with every missed blast. Is that all you've got? You were shaking the whole damn building last week. Fight me, he was goading him, trying to get him to lose his temper, to make a mistake. And Animus was right there, amplifying the taunt. He's mocking you. He's calling you weak. He has always called you weak. Remember the scorch marks on your uniform? The explosions in your face? The smell of burned sugar and contempt? Pay him back. Pay him back for every time he called you useless. The memories, sharp and painful, flooded Izuku's mind. A younger Kaken sneering, his hands sparking. The feeling of helplessness. The burn of shame. No! Izuku grunted, pushing the thoughts away. He ducked under a wide, sweeping blast and saw his opening. It was perfect. Bakugo was overextended, his side completely exposed. It was the chance he'd been waiting for. Okay. A quick, controlled counter. Shoot style. 15%. Just to the shoulder. Enough to unbalance him, knock him back. Not to hurt him. Just to show I can fight on my own terms. He channeled the power, carefully drawing it up, feeling for that specific, precise level of energy. He felt the familiar warmth of 15% fill his leg, the green lightning crackling with a comforting intensity. He pivoted, his body coiling like a spring, ready to unleash the controlled kick, and then the ice returned. It wasn't a flood this time. It was a sharp, brutal injection, a needle of absolute cold stabbing directly into the flow of his quirk. The warmth of One for All was instantly extinguished, consumed by a freezing, predatory power. His leg, already in motion, felt like it was suddenly detached from his will, a puppet on a string. He tried to pull back, to abort the kick. He screamed a silent, desperate "No!" in his own mind. But his muscles locked, contracting with a strength that wasn't his. The green lightning around his leg flared, the color shifting from a heroic emerald to that same venomous, sickly green. The energy output on his internal gauge, a sense he had painstakingly developed, didn't just climb. It jumped. It bypassed 20%, shot past 30%, and slammed to a halt at a staggering 45%. It was a level of power he could barely handle without shattering his bones, a level he would never, ever use on a classmate in a training exercise. A triumphant, ecstatic glee surged through his veins, an emotion so powerful it was physically nauseating. Animus was in control. Time seemed to stutter. He saw Bakugo's eyes widen, just for a fraction of a second, as he registered the sheer, horrifying amount of energy crackling around Izuku's foot. There was no time to dodge, no time to block. The impact wasn't the clean thwack of a sparring match. It was a sickening, wet crunch, a sound of immense force meeting flesh and bone. The 45% shoot-style kick, aimed for the shoulder, connected squarely with Bakugo's side. The world exploded in a shockwave of displaced air. Bakugo didn't just get knocked back. He was launched, a missile of flesh and fabric, his body spinning horizontally through the air. He flew a full 30 feet before slamming into the concrete facade of a building with a sickening thud, cracking the wall itself before slumping to the ground in a heap. Silence. The venomous green energy receded from Izuku's leg. The icy grip on his quirk loosened, leaving him trembling and hollow. He stood frozen, his legs still extended from the kick, his mind refusing to process what had just happened. The triumphant glee from Animus echoed in his head, a satisfied hum that made him want to vomit. Around the plaza, his classmates were utterly silent, their faces a mixture of shock and horror. Todoroki's mismatched eyes were wide, his analytical mind clearly struggling to comprehend the level of brutality he'd just witnessed. Uraraka had her hands clapped over her mouth, a gasp stifled behind them. Kirishima, whose entire ethos was built on manly spirit and honorable fighting, looked pale and sickened. From the observation area, Aizawa's voice came over the comms, cold and hard as iron. Match over. Medical team to the plaza. Now, All Might, who had been standing beside Aizawa, was a statue of gaunt horror. His skeletal face was ashen, his eyes fixed on Izuku, not with anger, but with a profound and terrifying fear. He wasn't looking at his successor. He was looking at a monster. Izuku finally lowered his leg, his body shaking so violently he could barely stand. He stared at Bakugo's still form, a crumpled pile of orange and black against the gray concrete. I did that. No. It did that. Using my body. A medical bot whirred onto the scene, its mechanical arms already extending with stabilizers and diagnostic tools. Bakugo stirred, groaning, a sound of pure agony. He pushed himself up slowly, clutching his side. His face was contorted in pain, but as he looked up, his eyes weren't filled with the rage Izuku expected. The medical team reached him, but Bakugo waved them off, stumbling to his feet. He took a few ragged breaths, his gaze locked on Izuku. He limped forward, each step a clear effort, his usual explosive energy replaced by a cold, simmering intensity. He stopped directly in front of Izuku, so close their chests were almost touching. The entire class held its breath. Izuku braced himself for the screaming, for the explosions, for the inevitable. Damn nerd! But it didn't come. Bakugo's crimson eyes were narrowed, sharp with a terrifyingly lucid suspicion. He wasn't looking at a rival he'd just lost to. He was looking at a puzzle he couldn't solve, at something deeply, fundamentally wrong. His voice, when he spoke, was a low, rasping growl, stripped of its usual bluster, and filled with a chilling seriousness Izuku had never heard before. What the hell was that, Deku? Izuku flinched, unable to meet his gaze. Kaken, I'm so sorry I lost control. Bullshit. Bakugo snarled, cutting him off. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper that was for Izuku alone. I know your power. I know your punches. I know your goddamn muttering. I know you. That wasn't you. The words struck Izuku with the force of a physical blow, colder and sharper than any punch Bakugo had ever thrown. This was worse than anger. It was observation. It was validation of his deepest fear. The monster wasn't just inside him anymore. It was visible. Kaken, the person who had known him his entire life, could see the seams. He could see the puppet master's strings. Tears pricked at the corners of Izuku's eyes, hot with shame and terror. Bakugo stared at him for a moment longer, his expression unreadable, before turning and limping toward the medical team, finally allowing them to treat him. The reprimand from Aizawa and All Might was severe, but it was a blur to Izuku. Words like reckless, unacceptable, and liability were thrown at him, but they barely registered. The only thing he could hear was Bakugo's whisper replaying over and over in his mind, that wasn't you. He was a pariah. As he walked back to the dorms, his classmates gave him a wide berth. They didn't speak to him. They just watched him with wary, unnerved eyes. He had crossed the line. He hadn't just defeated a classmate. He had brutalized him with a cold efficiency that had no place in a hero's repertoire. He didn't even try to go to the common room this time. He went straight to his room, the door clicking shut like a cell door. He was alone. Truly, completely alone. An animus was there to greet him. Did you feel it? It purred, its voice smooth and seductive. The power? The absolute certainty? That is what it means to be strong. The explosive one understands now. They all do. They fear you, and fear is a form of respect. Izuku slid down his door, burying his face in his hands. You're a monster, we are a god. Animus corrected him gently. You are just too afraid to accept it. Those friends of yours, your teachers, they are shackles. They want you to be small, predictable, safe. They want a puppy, but we are a wolf. It is time you stop pretending to be anything else. Cast them off. Embrace what you are. Desperation clawed at him. There had to be a way. A way to fight back. A way to silence it. He remembered reading something once, about how monks used meditation to achieve mental fortitude, to silence the noise of the world and find their center. Maybe if he could find his center, he could push Animus out. He sat cross-legged in the middle of his floor, just like he'd seen in pictures. He closed his eyes, forcing his trembling body to be still. He tried to regulate his breathing, in and out, slow and deep. Clear your mind, he told himself. Find the quiet place. He focused on the sensation of the floor beneath him, the air entering his lungs. For a moment, a fragile peace began to settle. The constant thrum of Animus seemed to quiet, to recede. Hope, desperate and fierce, surged in him. It was a trap. The moment he let his guard down, the moment he opened himself up to the quiet, Animus struck. The mental landscape of his mind, the place he was trying to calm, was violently hijacked. He was no longer in his room. He was standing in the ruins of the USJ, the glass of the dome crunching under his boots. The air was thick with smoke and the metallic scent of blood. He looked down at his hands. They were covered in it. Panic seized him. He looked around wildly, and his heart stopped. Lying scattered across the plaza were the broken bodies of his friends. Ida, his armor crushed, his legs bent at unnatural angles. Todoroki, encased partially in his own ice, his face a mask of shock. Uraraka, her suit torn, her face pale and still, lying near the fountain, and standing over them all, was him. Or rather, a version of him. The version from his reflection. His eyes were glowing with that terrifying green light, and that slow, cruel, predatory smile was on his face. He felt the phantom echo of that smile on his own lips, a horrifying muscular twitch. The vision him turned, his glowing eyes locking onto Izuku. He raised a blood-soaked hand and gestured to the carnage. "This is true strength." The vision's voice echoed, layered and distorted, the sound of Izuku's and Animus's voices intertwined. "This is peace. Order. No more weakness. No more doubt. Just our will." The vision then turned its gaze toward the entrance of the USJ. All Might stood there in his muscle form, his face a canvas of agony and disbelief. "Young Midoriya, why?" All Might whispered, his voice breaking. The smiling, monstrous version of Izuku simply laughed, a sound that chilled Izuku to the very marrow of his bones. Then, it lunged toward All Might, its body crackling with 100% of One for All, an unstoppable force of pure malice. "No!" Izuku was ripped from the vision, his own scream tearing through the silence of his dorm room. He was back on his floor, gasping for air, his body drenched in sweat. The terror was absolute, a physical thing that left him shaking and sick. He had tried to find the silence, and instead, he had been shown the abyss. He had tried to find a weapon to fight the monster, and the monster had shown him its dream. A dream where he stood alone, smiling, atop the ruins of everything he had ever loved. He wasn't just losing control of his power. He was losing a war for his own soul. The nightmare clung to Izuku like a shroud long after he woke up screaming. The image of his friends' broken bodies, of All Might's face contorted in agony, was seared onto the inside of his eyelids. It wasn't a dream, it was a threat. A promise from Animus of what would happen if its will was not obeyed. Sleep was no longer a refuge. It was a torture chamber. He stopped trying to sleep altogether. The nights became a long, grueling vigil against his own mind. He'd pace the confines of his small room, the All Might posters on his walls seeming to mock him with their bright, heroic optimism. He'd do push-ups until his muscles screamed, hoping physical exhaustion would silence the voice. It never did. It just watched his frantic efforts with a detached, clinical amusement, fleeing from the inevitable. Animus would murmur, its tone almost gentle, which was somehow more terrifying than its open contempt. "You burn your energy fighting yourself. Imagine what we could accomplish if you aimed that desperation outward." He looked like a ghost. His uniform, usually so immaculate, hung loosely on his frame. The dark circles under his eyes had become sunken hollows. His skin was pale and waxy, his movements jumpy and erratic. He flinched at loud noises, at sudden movements, at a friendly hand on his shoulder. His classmates' worried glances had morphed into a mixture of pity and fear. They spoke to him in hushed, careful tones, as if he were a piece of delicate, cracked glass that might shatter at the slightest vibration. He was drowning, and the surface was getting further and further away. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he couldn't survive this alone. The incident with Bakugo had been a brutal escalation. The vision had been a declaration of war. He was out of options. There was only one person he could turn to, one person who might, just might, be able to understand the impossible burden of this quirk. All Might. The decision was born of pure desperation. It felt like his last, desperate gamble. He had to make him understand. Not just the pressure, not just the instability, but the sentience. The malevolence. He waited until after evening classes, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He tracked All Might down not in his office or the teacher's lounge, but in one of the smaller, private training gyms, where he often went to reflect. The scent of old sweat and iron hung in the air. All Might was in his skeletal form, standing before a large mirror, his expression weary and profoundly sad. For a moment, Izuku saw not the symbol of peace, but a tired old man haunted by his own legacy. The sight almost made him turn back. How could he possibly add his monstrous burden to those already stooped shoulders? "He is weak now," Animus whispered, its voice laced with disdain. A hollowed-out shell. He gave us his power, and it left him a husk. He cannot help you. He cannot even help himself. Shut up, Izuku breathed, his voice a ragged whisper. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to take a step into the gym. The sound of his footstep made All Might turn. His face, already etched with worry, tightened further when he saw the state of his successor. Young Midoriya, he said, his voice soft. I was just thinking about you. Are you all right? You don't look well, All Might. I need to talk to you, Izuku stammered, his carefully rehearsed words abandoning him. It's about one for all. All Might's expression softened with empathy. He gestured to a nearby bench. Of course, my boy. Sit. Whatever it is, we will face it together. The kindness in his voice was a physical blow. Tears pricked at Izuku's eyes. He sat, perching on the very edge of the bench, his hands twisting in his lap. All Might sat beside him, the silence stretching between them, heavy with unspoken fears. The fight with young Bakugo. All Might began gently. Aizawa and I may have been harsh. The pressure you are under is immense, more than any of us could have predicted. To be grappling with 7 quirks, it's not the pressure. Izuku interrupted, his voice tight. He had to say it now, before his courage failed him. He took a deep, shuddering breath. It's the quirk itself. All Might, it's alive. All Might's brow furrowed. He tilted his head, a gesture of patient confusion. Alive? What do you mean, my boy? The vestiges, yes. Their wills, their consciousnesses, they reside within the power. I have felt them myself. They are a part of you now. A council of allies. No, Izuku said, shaking his head frantically. Not them. Something else. Something wrong. When I lost control, both times, it wasn't me. It was something inside the quirk, something that enjoys hurting people. It has a voice. It talks to me. It wants to take over. It wants to destroy. He finally looked up, his wide, terrified eyes pleading with his mentor to believe him. It's malevolent, All Might. It's a monster wearing my skin. As the words tumbled out, a torrent of frantic confession, Animus fought back. It started as a pressure behind his eyes, a sharp, stabbing pain that made him wince. Then, a wave of dizziness washed over him, and the gym seemed to tilt on its axis. You are a fool to betray us. Animus's voice wasn't a whisper now. It was a roar in his mind, a psychic shriek of fury. You think this broken old man can save you? I will show you what a mistake this is. The assault was immediate and brutal. As Izuku tried to form his next sentence, to explain the vision, Animus choked the words in his throat. A phantom hand seemed to squeeze his larynx, and his voice came out as a strangled gasp. He started to cough, his chest seizing. Young Midoriya? All Might exclaimed, alarmed, leaning forward to put a hand on his back. Izuku waved him off, fighting for breath. He tried to speak again, to force the words out. It showed me. Animus shifted tactics. It didn't just block his words, it corrupted them. It flooded his mind with a cacophony of distorted noise. The screech of metal, Bakugo's pained groan, the laughter from his nightmare, all at once. The sensory overload was disorienting, making it impossible to form a coherent thought. His carefully constructed explanation shattered into 1,000 panicked fragments. He started to stutter, his sentences breaking apart. The voice, it's in my head, and the power, it's not warm like you said, it's sea cold, so cold. To All Might, he must have looked like he was having a complete breakdown. His eyes were wild, unfocused. His speech was a disjointed, paranoid mess. He was trembling from head to toe. Then came the cruelest attack of all. Animus reached into his memories, twisting them into weapons. It conjured the image of All Might's face, not filled with empathy, but with a cold, sharp disappointment. The memory of All Might on the rooftop, telling him he couldn't be a hero without a quirk, warped into something venomous. You were nothing. A pebble. The memory All Might sneered in Animus's voice. A fresh wave of terror and shame washed over Izuku. The man sitting next to him, his hero, suddenly seemed like a judge. The fear that All Might would see him as a failure, as unworthy, a vessel that had cracked under the strain, became an overwhelming certainty. He couldn't do it. He couldn't confess the full, horrifying truth. He sounded like a madman. He sounded paranoid and weak. He was failing. He trailed off into a choked silence, his gaze falling to the floor, unable to look his mentor in the eye. All Might was quiet for a long time. The hand on Izuku's back rubbed slow, gentle circles. The concern radiating from him was palpable, a stark contrast to the vicious mockery in Izuku's head. "My boy," All Might finally said, his voice heavy with a profound, aching sorrow. I think I understand." A flicker of hope ignited in Izuku's chest. "He believes me. The burden I have placed upon you is greater than I ever knew." All Might continued, his voice strained. "One for All is not just a quirk, it is a living history. 8 lifetimes of struggle, of hope, of pain, all compressed into one soul. It is no wonder you feel a presence, a voice. It is the echo of all those who came before. It is the immense psychological pressure of the quirk itself given form by your own fears. The fear of failure, the fear of not being strong enough, the fear of hurting those you love. It's a crucible, young Midoriya, and it is forging you. But the fire is hotter than I could have ever imagined." Izuku's heart sank like a stone. He didn't understand. Not at all. He was rationalizing it. He was filtering Izuku's terror through his own experience, through the lens of psychology and metaphor. He heard a living monster, and translated it to a manifestation of psychological stress. It was a logical, well-intentioned, and completely wrong interpretation. "You have the heart of a true hero," All Might said, his voice firm with conviction. "That is why I chose you. Not for your power, but for your spirit. That spirit is stronger than any fear, stronger than any pressure. The vestiges can be overwhelming, yes. They're combined what can feel like a foreign entity. But they chose you too. You will overcome this, I have no doubt." Every word of reassurance was a nail in the coffin of Izuku's hope. He felt a profound, soul-crushing loneliness settle over him. He had reached out from the abyss, and his hero had seen the struggle, but not the monster that was pulling him down. He was utterly, completely alone with it. He couldn't bring himself to argue. He didn't have the strength. Animus was purring with satisfaction in his mind. "I told you. He is useless. He sees a frightened child, not a king in the making. He cannot help you." "Why yeah," Izuku mumbled, his voice flat and dead. "You're right. It's just the pressure. I just need to be stronger." All Might squeezed his shoulder, a gesture of pride that felt like a brand of failure. "That's the spirit, my boy. Now let's get you back to the dorms. You need rest." The walk back was a silent one. Izuku was a hollow shell, the space inside him filled with the cold, triumphant presence of Animus. He had tried to expose it, to bring it into the light, and he had failed. He had only succeeded in making himself look unstable, confirming to his mentor that the problem was with his own mind, not with the quirk itself. When he finally got back to the sanctuary of his room, the feeling of defeat was absolute. He collapsed onto his chair, staring blankly at the wall. The door had been shut. The last avenue of escape was gone, and now, Animus would exact its punishment. "You tried to betray us," it whispered, the voice no longer mocking, but filled with a chilling, quiet rage. "You tried to turn our own history against us. An act of rebellion like that requires a response, a demonstration of who is truly in control." Izuku's eyes darted to his hands, expecting them to move on their own, to smash something. But nothing happened. He sat there, trembling, waiting for the blow to fall. His gaze drifted to his desk, to his collection of hero analysis journals. They were his life's work, the physical manifestation of his hope and his passion. Volume 13 was open, the page filled with his meticulous, detailed handwriting and careful sketches, an in-depth analysis of Endeavor's abilities he'd been working on. It was a study of power, control, and the potential for redemption. He watched in horror as his right hand, the one where the coldness of Animus always seemed to pool, lifted from his lap. It moved with a smooth, fluid grace that was not his own. It was a puppet's movement, precise and detached, He tried to pull it back, to fight it, but his own muscles wouldn't respond. He was locked in place, a spectator to his own body's actions. The hand reached for the pen resting on the desk. His fingers, wrapped around it. The grip was too tight, the knuckles white. The hand hovered over his careful, hopeful analysis of endeavor. "He is the past," Animus whispered, the words syncing with the movement of the pen. "A flawed, emotional creature who barely controls the fire within him. He is a candle against the supernova we will become." The pen descended. With a sharp, angry press that tore at the paper, his hand began to write. The handwriting was not his own frantic, slightly messy scrawl. It was sharp, angular, and aggressive. The letters were like shards of glass. Across his detailed breakdown of flash fire fist and hell spider, his own hand carved a single, brutal phrase, the ink bleeding into the paper like a wound. Obsolete. The word was an execution. A final, definitive judgment scrawled over his work, over his hope, over the very idea of the hero he was trying to become. It wasn't just an insult to endeavor. It was a promise of what Animus intended to do to all heroes, to the entire system Izuku revered. They were all obsolete in the face of the pure, perfect power it represented. The pen lifted. His hand released it, and it clattered onto the desk. Control flooded back into his arm, leaving behind a pins and needles sensation and a profound, soul-deep chill. Izuku stared at the defaced page, at the angry black word that had violated his most sacred space. This was not a loss of control. This was not a stress-induced hallucination. This was a calculated act of psychological warfare. Animus hadn't just punished him for speaking out, it had desecrated his very identity. It had taken his greatest passion, his analysis, his love for heroes, and used it as a weapon against him. He slowly reached out with his trembling left hand and touched the page, his fingertips tracing the jagged, alien letters. A single, hot tear fell from his eye and splashed onto the paper, smudging the ink. He lay in bed that night, but he didn't close his eyes. He stared up at the dark ceiling, feeling the power of one for all pulsing under his skin. It was no longer a warm, comforting hum. It was the slow, rhythmic breathing of a predator coiled in his veins, waiting. It was a foreign and hostile presence, a parasite that was slowly, methodically, corroding him from the inside out. The fight was over. He had lost. He was trapped in a prison made of his own body, with a monster for a cellmate. And the monster was just getting started. "He can't help you," Animus purred, its voice now calm and soothing, the voice of a victor consoling the vanquished. It was the most terrifying sound he had ever heard. "No one can. They are all too weak to understand. But I can. I understand your desire for strength. Your hunger for recognition. You were quirkless, Izuku. A zero. I am the one. Together, we can have everything you ever dreamed of." The voice paused, letting the insidious offer sink in. "Only I can give you the power you truly crave." Izuku didn't answer. He just lay there, silent and still, as the corrosive power inside him pulsed with a dark and patient promise. The word burned in his journal. Obsolete. Izuku had tried to erase it, but the ink had bled deep, a permanent, jagged scar on the paper. He had ended up tearing the page out, then tearing it again and again until it was nothing but confetti, a frantic act of destruction that did nothing to quell the violation he felt. The word was still there, branded on his mind. In the days that followed his failed confession to All Might, a new and terrible phase of his internal war began. Animus was no longer just a voice. It was a presence, a weight in his soul. The dynamic had shifted. Before, Izuku had been a victim fighting his tormentor. Now, he was a defeated prisoner, and Animus was the warden, biding its time, testing the bars of its cage. The physical manifestations became more frequent, more subtle. A twitch in his fingers he didn't command. A fleeting, cold smile that would touch his lips when he saw a weaker student struggle in training, an expression that would vanish as soon as he became aware of it, leaving him feeling sick and disgusted with himself. He started wearing long sleeves, even in the warm autumn weather, to hide the way the skin on his right arm would sometimes shimmer with a faint, venomous green light when he was agitated. He was a ghost in the halls of UA. His friends, bless their hearts, still tried to reach him. Uraraka would offer him machi, her smile tinged with a persistent worry. Ida would lecture him on the importance of proper nutrition and social engagement, his earnestness a painful reminder of the normality Izuku had lost. Todoroki would just sit with him sometimes, a silent, grounding presence that Izuku both craved and feared. He appreciated their efforts more than they could ever know, but their kindness was like sunlight on a vampire. It hurt, because it illuminated the darkness he was becoming. Every attempt they made to connect was a fresh opportunity for Animus to whisper its poison. She pities you. It would hum as Uraraka left his side, her shoulders slumped in disappointment. She sees a broken toy, not a partner. He lectures you like a child. It would sneer as Ida adjusted his glasses. He sees weakness to be corrected, not strength to be revered. He sees a rival he has already surpassed. It would hiss as Todoroki walked away. His own darkness is a flickering candle. Ours is a sun. Izuku built his walls higher. He became an expert at deflection, at polite but firm refusals. He was isolating himself, he knew, doing exactly what Animus wanted. But it felt like the only way to protect them. The farther away they were, the less likely they were to be caught in the blast radius when he finally, inevitably, detonated. He was on a knife's edge, and the blade was getting thinner every day. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday. It was a designated work-study patrol day. Due to the incident with Bakugo, Aizawa had initially benched him, but after a week of Izuku's withdrawn, ghost-like behavior, and perhaps a gentle nudge from a worried All Might, the restriction had been partially lifted. He was cleared for patrol, but with a strict caveat, observation only. No engagement unless explicitly ordered by the pro-heroes supervising them. He was, in essence, a spectator with a provisional license. Their patrol route with the lurkers, the hero team led by Edge Shot, Kamui Woods, and Empty Lady, was in a bustling commercial district. The mundane reality of it was almost surreal to Izuku. While a war for his soul was raging inside him, the world kept turning. People shopped for groceries, children laughed, and heroes gave directions to tourists. He walked a few paces behind Kamui Woods, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, his gaze fixed on the pavement. The constant, low-level thrum of Animus was a familiar headache. It was bored, pointless. We patrol for purse snatchers while we hold the power to level this entire city block. This is a profound waste of our potential. You are a watchdog on a leash, dreaming of being a wolf. I am a hero, Izuku thought back, his mental voice weak and tired. And this is what heroes do. They protect the peace. Peace is an illusion, Animus countered smoothly. There is only power, and the will to use it. This city is a tinderbox, and we are the spark. As if summoned by Animus's dark prophecy, chaos erupted. It started with a high-pitched alarm from a jewelry store down the street, followed by the sound of shattering glass. 3 figures burst out onto the sidewalk, carrying heavy bags. They were not your average thugs. They were huge, their bodies warped and swollen with the effects of some kind of physical enhancement quirk. One had skin like rough granite, another had arms that had split into 4, thick with corded muscle. The third was wreathed in a faint, shimmering energy field. Lurkers, move in! Edshot's voice was sharp, cutting through the panicked screams of civilians. Empty Lady gigantified, her presence immediately creating a barrier. Kamui Wood shot forward, his arms extending into a lacquered chain prison. The pros were moving with practiced, flawless efficiency. Izuku stood frozen on the sidewalk, his orders echoing in his mind. Observation only. It was a sensible command. He was a liability, a loose cannon, but watching from the sidelines while people were in danger felt like acid in his veins. The instinct to help, the core of his very being, was screaming at him to move. And Animus saw its opening. The 4-armed villain backhanded a fleeing salaryman, sending him sprawling toward a busy intersection. The granite-skinned one threw a lamppost like a javelin, aiming for Kamui Woods. The situation was escalating, becoming more violent by the second. Then he saw her. A little girl, no older than 5, clutching a fallen All Might plushie. She had tripped in the chaos and was sitting stunned in the middle of the sidewalk, directly in the path of the third villain, the one with the energy field, who was making a break for it. Time slowed down. Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs. Edge Shot was occupied with the 4-armed brute. Kamui was dodging the lamppost. Empty Lady was trying to contain the area without crushing cars. No one was going to get to the girl in time. He had to move. He had to. He could feel one for all buzzing, desperate to be used. But with it came the cold, a chilling premonition of what would happen if he let it loose. The fear of Animus and the desperate need to save the child were two titanic forces tearing him apart. He was hesitating. And a hero never hesitates. It was in that moment of crippling indecision, of pure, agonizing conflict, that Animus spoke. Its voice was no longer a whisper or a hiss. It was a calm, rational, and terrifyingly seductive offer. You cannot save her like this, Izuku. You are too slow. Too weak. Too afraid. But I am not. Give me the reins. Just for a moment. I will neutralize the threat. I will ensure her safety. I will show you what real power, used efficiently, looks like. They will all be safe if you just let go. The words wrapped around his panic, soothing it, offering a simple, elegant solution to an impossible problem. It was a deal with the devil, a bargain made in a split second of abject terror. He saw the villain getting closer to the girl, his shimmering field crackling with energy. His own will, fractured and exhausted, finally crumbled. In the silent screaming chaos of his own mind, he made a desperate, silent plea. A concession. A surrender. Just this once. Just save her. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. It was like a switch being flipped. The frantic, terrified noise in his head went silent. The agonizing conflict vanished, and the cold, the pure, absolute zero of Animus flooded every cell of his being. He was no longer a driver fighting for the wheel. He was a passenger, strapped into the back seat, watching the world through the windows of his own eyes. His body moved. There was no hesitation. No panicked burst of energy. What followed was a display of such cold, inhuman precision that it was 1,000 times more terrifying than any rage-fueled smash. His posture corrected itself, his spine straightening, his shoulders rolling back. His head tilted slightly. His eyes, now glowing with a faint but undeniable venomous green, scanned the scene. It wasn't the frantic, emotional scan of a hero trying to save everyone. It was the scan of a predator assessing a battlefield, cataloging threats, and identifying the most efficient path to victory. His lips, Izuku's lips, curled into the faintest, most chilling of smirks. It was a look of utter confidence, of absolute superiority. Observe. Animus's voice echoed, not in his mind, but from a place deeper, a place of core command. The voice was for him, the prisoner. A lesson from the master. He didn't launch himself with a desperate leap. He took a single, powerful step, pushing off with a perfectly calibrated 21% of one for all. The pavement cracked under his boot, but his body remained perfectly stable. He didn't shoot forward in a straight line. He moved in a low, weaving trajectory, using the panicked crowds and abandoned cars as cover, his path mathematically perfect to avoid detection and minimize collateral damage. The villain with the energy field was almost upon the little girl. He was laughing, a cruel, ugly sound. Izuku, or the thing wearing his skin, emerged from behind a parked van. He was a green and black blur of motion. The villain didn't even have time to register him as a threat before he was on him. There were no shouted attack names. There was no heroic battle cry. There was only quiet, brutal efficiency. Black Whip erupted from his right arm. But it wasn't the wild, lashing tendrils Izuku struggled to control. These were thin, sharp, and precise as surgeon's scalpels. One tendril shot out, not to wrap around the villain's body, but to spear through the shimmering energy shield, which popped like a soap bubble. Two more tendrils instantly followed, wrapping around the villain's ankles with a sickening snap of bone. The villain screamed, a high, piercing sound of agony, and collapsed. Simultaneously, Izuku's left leg, powered by a controlled 30% burst, swung up in a flawless arc. It wasn't a shoot-style kick meant to knock out. It was a precise, calculated strike. His foot connected with the side of the villain's head with a dull, wet thud. The villain's eyes rolled back in his head, and he was unconscious before he hit the ground. The entire engagement, from emergence to neutralization, had taken less than 3 seconds. The body, his body, didn't pause to admire its work. It was already moving. The granite-skinned villain, having seen his comrade fall, let out a roar of rage and charged, his heavy fists raised. Izuku's body pivoted. Fa Jean, a Quirk Izuku was still struggling to even activate consciously, was engaged. He took 3 quick, almost imperceptible steps, the kinetic energy building in his muscles, invisible to the naked eye. Predictable. Animus thought, the assessment cold and dismissive. Brute force. Limited tactical awareness. The granite villain threw a punch that could have pulverized the car. Izuku's body didn't dodge. It flowed. It moved under the punch, so close the villain's rocky knuckles scraped his hair. As he moved, he released the stored energy from Fa Jean in a single, explosive burst. His right hand, open-palmed, shot up. It wasn't a smash. It was a targeted strike. His palm connected with the villain's elbow joint from underneath. The force, amplified by Fa Jean and a microburst of One for All, was devastating. There was a loud, horrifying crack, like a thick branch snapping. The villain's arm bent backwards at an impossible angle. He howled, clutching his ruined arm. Before he could recover, a black-whip tendril, thick as a python this time, erupted from Izuku's back and slammed into the villain's chest, cracking his granite-like skin and sending him flying into the wall of the jewelry store, where he slumped, moaning and incapacitated. 2 down. The four-armed villain, who had been grappling with Edge Shot, saw his 2 partners fall in a matter of seconds. His eyes, wide with panic, met Izuku's glowing green ones from across the street. He saw not a hero in training, but a predator. He abandoned his fight with Edge Shot and made a desperate run for it, shoving civilians out of his way. Unacceptable. Animus stated. Escape is not an option. Izuku's body crouched low. Float activated, lifting him a foot off the ground to negate friction. A full 45% of One for All surged into his legs. He launched himself forward, a green missile of righteous, terrifying fury. He covered the 50 yards separating them in the blink of an eye. He landed directly in the fleeing villain's path. The man skidded to a halt, his forearms windmilling in panic. Stay back! Get away from me! The villain shrieked, his tough guy facade crumbling into raw fear. Izuku's body simply tilted its head, the gesture one of mild curiosity, of a scientist observing a particularly interesting insect. Then it attacked. The display that followed was a masterpiece of controlled violence. Black-whip tendrils shot out, not to bind, but to strike. They moved like vipers, targeting pressure points and joints with pinpoint accuracy. A strike to the shoulder to force a dislocation. A lash across the knees to buckle the legs. A quick wrap and squeeze around each of the 4 wrists, eliciting 4 sharp cracks and screams of pain. In seconds, the villain was on the ground, disarmed and broken, whimpering in a pool of his own misery. There was no heroic passion in the takedown, no righteous anger, just the cold, detached, and brutal efficiency of a machine designed for one purpose: neutralization. 3 down. The battle was over. The whole street was silent, save for the moans of the defeated villains and the distant wail of sirens. The civilians who had been screaming in terror were now staring, mouths agape, at the lone figure standing in the center of the street. The lurkers were frozen. Edge Shot stood mid-stance, his folded body a testament to his shock. Kamui Woods had his arm half extended, the wood frozen in place. Empty Lady, still in her giant form, looked down with wide, disbelieving eyes. They hadn't been part of a team effort. They had been spectators to a slaughter. Izuku's body slowly straightened. The faint green glow in his eyes intensified for a moment, a final, triumphant flare, before receding. The cold, absolute control of Animus pulled back, relinquishing the driver's seat, and Izuku Midoriya crashed back into his own body. The sudden return of his own consciousness was a physical shock. Sensation flooded back in a painful, overwhelming wave. The aches in his muscles from the extreme power output, the sharp, coppery tang of adrenaline in his mouth. The horrified gasps of the people around him, and the silence. The terrible, ringing silence where the voice of Animus had been. He looked down at his own hands, balled into fists. They felt alien, like weapons he didn't recognize. He looked at the 3 broken men, groaning and defeated. He had done that. His body. His quirk. His gaze snapped to the little girl. She was safe. A bystander had scooped her up and was comforting her. She was clutching her All Might plushie, her face buried in the woman's shoulder. She was safe. The bargain had been kept. He had saved her. But at what cost? He turned his head, and his eyes met the gazes of his friends. Uraraka, Ida, and Todoroki had been part of a secondary patrol group and had arrived as backup, drawn by the commotion. They hadn't seen the beginning of the fight, but they had seen the end. They had seen the horrifying efficiency. The brutal, systematic takedown. Ida's face, usually so composed and resolute, was slack with shock. Todoroki's expression was a mask of cold, hard analysis. His eyes narrowed as he tried to process the impossible display of power and control he had just witnessed. And Uraraka, her expression broke his heart. It was a maelstrom of confusion, awe, and a deep, gut-wrenching fear. Her hand was half raised, as if she had been about to call out to him, but had stopped, unsure of who, or what, she was looking at. They weren't looking at Deku, their friend, the earnest, crying hero in training. They were looking at a monster. He took a step toward them, a word of explanation, of apology, dying on his lips. As he moved, several civilians instinctively flinched back, one woman pulling her child behind her. The small, protective gesture was a physical blow. They were afraid of him. His gaze fell back to his hands. He saw them not as tools for saving people, but as instruments of horrific violence. He saw the dislocated joints, the shattered bones, the cold, detached precision. A wave of nausea and self-loathing so powerful it made him gag washed over him. He had unleashed the beast to save one person, and in doing so, had terrified 100 more. He had proven Animus right. Its way was more effective. Its way was stronger. See? The voice was back, a soft, satisfied purr in the quiet of his mind. It was smug, triumphant, and utterly proprietary. So much better. The world swam before his eyes. The horrified faces of his friends, the fear in the eyes of the civilians, the moans of the men he had broken, all blurred into an unbearable tableau of his own failure. He had made a deal to save a life, and the price had been a piece of his soul. The puppet master had made its debut, and the audience was terrified. And Izuku Midoriya, the puppet, could do nothing but stand on the stage, tangled in his own strings, and weep without tears. The aftermath of the patrol was a sterile, silent affair. There was no praise for his terrifying efficiency. There were no congratulations for neutralizing 3 dangerous villains in under a minute. There was only a heavy, oppressive quiet, thick with unspoken questions and a palpable, collective fear. The lurkers had taken over the scene, their movements stiff and professional, their glances towards Izuku fleeting and wary. They spoke to him only in clipped, necessary phrases. He was escorted back to UA by Aizawa himself. His teacher didn't walk beside him as a mentor, but behind him, like a guard. The silence in the car was absolute, a crushing weight that felt heavier than any lecture. Izuku stared out the window at the passing city lights, but he didn't see them. He saw the sharp, viper-like movements of his own black whip. He heard the sickening crunch of bone under his foot. He felt the phantom chill of Animus's satisfaction. The meeting took place in Principal Nizu's office. The air was thick with tension. Nizu, All Might, and Aizawa sat on one side of the large desk. Izuku sat on the other, a solitary defendant in a trial for his own soul. He felt small, a child in a room full of giants. The reports from the lurkers are unequivocal. Nizu began, his beady eyes sharp and analytical. He folded his paws together on the desk. 3 villains, all with potent enhancement quirks, were incapacitated by you, Midoriya, in approximately 45 seconds. The level of force used was, while not lethal, extreme. Multiple comminuted fractures, severe joint dislocations, and significant internal trauma. All Might, gaunt and hollow-eyed, looked at Izuku with an expression of profound, aching confusion. Young Midoriya, the control you displayed, it was flawless. A level of mastery over One for All and its vestiges that even I never achieved. But your methods, the brutality, it was not the work of a hero. Aizawa's assessment was, as always, blunt and to the point. It was the work of a soldier. A machine. You identified threats and eliminated them with zero wasted motion and zero regard for proportionate response. That kind of coldness has no place at UA. The verdict was swift and unavoidable. Effective immediately, you are on mandatory leave from all field exercises, combat training, and work studies, Aizawa stated, his voice flat and final. You will be confined to the Heights Alliance campus until we can fully assess the nature of this Quirk instability. You are, at present, a liability to yourself and to others, Quirk instability. The phrase was a clinical, sterile bandage slapped over a gaping, gangrenous wound. It was the official story, the neat and tidy explanation that would be filed away in his record, but Izuku knew the truth. It wasn't instability. It was a hostile takeover, and this, he realized with a fresh wave of ice-cold dread, was exactly what Animus had wanted. The first day of his confinement was a disorienting haze. While his classmates left for their morning classes, he was left behind in the echoing silence of the dorm's common room. The morning sun streamed through the large windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The room, usually a vibrant hub of noise and life, felt like a museum exhibit, a diorama of a life he was no longer a part of. He was a prisoner. A captive audience of one. And the show was about to begin. Animus had been quiet since its smug pronouncement after the fight, a predator digesting its meal. But now, in the forced idleness and isolation, it began to stir. The psychological war escalated from a series of skirmishes into a full-blown siege. They have caged you. It began, its voice a low, sympathetic hum in the back of his mind as he stared out the window at his friends walking toward the main school building. They fear what they cannot understand. They see your strength, and instead of nurturing it, they seek to contain it. They are afraid of what we can become. They're afraid of you. Izuku whispered to the empty room, his voice hoarse. They are afraid of the strength you lack the courage to claim. Animus countered smoothly. But do not worry. This cage is a gift. It frees you from their distractions, from their petty concerns and their weakening influence. Now we have all the time in the world to get properly acquainted. The nights were the worst. Sleep was no longer an option. The moment he would begin to drift off, Animus would drag him into a nightmare. They weren't the abstract horrors of a troubled mind. They were bespoke tortures, meticulously crafted from his deepest fears and insecurities. He would be back in the USJ, but this time, he wouldn't be a spectator. He would feel the blood on his hands, feel the sickening crunch as he brought his foot down on Ida's armored leg. He would feel the cold glee, Animus's glee, flooding him as he did it. He would wake up with a silent scream caught in his throat, the phantom sensation of his own smile, that cruel, monstrous smile, stretching his lips. He would dream he was taking the UA entrance exam again. He'd see Uraraka trapped under the rubble, and he'd leap to save her. But when he smashed the zero-pointer, the debris wouldn't just fall away. It would rain down on her, crushing her, and he would land amidst the wreckage, laughing. The sound of his own laughter, twisted and layered with Animus's voice, would jolt him awake, his heart trying to hammer its way out of his chest. The most insidious nightmares were the quiet ones. Animus began to twist his memories, corroding the past, poisoning the foundations of his identity. He'd see his first meeting with All Might on the rooftop. But in the memory, when All Might offered him the quirk, his smile was thin and calculating. Become a vessel for a power greater than you will ever be. The memory All Might would say. He saw the memory of Uraraka calling him, Deku, in a new, inspiring way. Now, her voice was laced with pity. It sounds like you can't do it, but I'll cheer for you anyway, you poor, quirkless thing. He saw Bakugo, not as a childhood friend turned rival, but as a prophet. Every useless Deku. Every sneer, every explosion was reframed not as bullying, but as a correct and accurate assessment of his worthlessness without the power Animus provided. See? Animus would whisper as he reeled from these corrupted memories. Your entire life has been a lie. Your hero pitied you. Your friends underestimated you. Your rival was the only one honest enough to tell you the truth. You were nothing. We made you something. The constant barrage was having a devastating physical effect. He stopped eating, the thought of food turning his stomach to lead. The few times he forced himself to go to the common room kitchen when it was empty, he'd just stare at the food in the fridge, his appetite gone, his mind too full of horrors to think about something as mundane as sustenance. He lost weight, his already lean frame becoming gaunt. His green eyes, once bright with determination, were now dull and sunken, swimming in dark, bruised hollows. He spent his days pacing his room like a caged wolf, from the door to the window and back again. The path became a worn groove in his carpet, and in his mind, he traced the lines on his All Might posters, the bright colors a stark contrast to the gray landscape of his thoughts. He tried to read, but the words would swim on the page, rearranging themselves into Animus's taunts. He tried to watch TV, but the happy faces on the screen felt like a personal attack. His friends, his real friends, didn't give up. Not at first. There would be a soft knock on his door. "Deku-kun?" Uraraka's voice, hesitant and full of concern. "We brought you some katsudon. Sato made it special. Are you hungry?" He'd stand on the other side of the door, his hand hovering over the knob, his throat tight. He wanted to open it. He wanted to see her friendly face, to take the food, to pretend for 5 minutes that everything was okay. But Animus would be right there, its voice a venomous whisper. "Open it! Let her see what you're becoming. Let her see the monster she's so worried about. Or better yet, let me say hello." The thought of Animus taking control, of his face twisting into that cruel smile as he looked at Uraraka, was enough to make him physically recoil from the door. "I'm not hungry," he'd call out, his voice a dead monotone. "Thanks though. I'm just trying to study." He'd hear her sigh on the other side of the door, a small, sad sound, followed by the soft clink of the plate being set on the floor. "Okay, Deku-kun. It'll be here if you change your mind." He would wait until her footsteps faded away before slumping against the door, his body trembling with the effort of resisting his own despair. Ida tried a more direct approach, knocking with a firm, rhythmic pattern. "Midoriya! It is 1900 hours! You have been secluded for 72 hours. This is detrimental to both your physical and mental health. As your class representative and your friend, I must insist you open this door and engage in social interaction." "His precious rules," Animus sneered. "He thinks order can be imposed. He doesn't understand that true order comes from absolute power. Our power. Break his rules. Break his spirit. Show him what real authority looks like." "I'm fine, Ida-kun," Izuku would call back, his voice strained. "Aizawa-sensei gave me a special training regimen to work on. It requires total concentration." It was a weak lie, and they both knew it. But it was all he had. He was pushing them away, hurting them with his silence and his lies. And every time he did, a part of him died, and Animus grew stronger, feeding on his guilt and isolation. The prison wasn't just the campus. It was the 4 walls of his room, the confines of his own skull. Aizawa was no fool. He had confined Izuku, but he was also observing him. The teacher would occasionally appear on the dorm's security monitors that Nisa had access to, his tired eyes watching Izuku's ghostly figure pacing the common room late at night. He knew this was more than just a kid struggling with his quirk. He had seen fear before. He had seen trauma. But this was different. Midoriya looked haunted, like he was fighting a war no one else could see. Aizawa began his own quiet investigation. He pulled up every file on Izuku Midoriya, from his quirkless medical records to the most recent incident report. He rewatched combat footage from the USJ, the sports festival, the fight against Muscular, the clash with Overhaul. He was looking for a pattern, a tell, something he had missed. He cross-referenced it with reports on other powerful quirks that had led to psychological breaks. He even had a long, confidential talk with Hound Dog, the school's counselor. "It presents like a severe dissociative episode brought on by trauma and stress," Hound Dog had said, his professional tone doing little to hide his concern. "But the way you describe his actions, the cold, tactical precision, that's not dissociation. That's integration. It's like a different, more ruthless personality is taking the wheel. A dangerous alter." The word alter stuck in Aizawa's mind. It felt chillingly accurate. The breaking point of the long vigil came late one night, nearly a week into his confinement. The dorm was silent, the air still and heavy. Izuku was on his floor, having given up on his bed, curled into a ball, trying to make himself as small as possible. He was exhausted, but sleep was a predator he dared not engage. He was just trying to survive until morning. Suddenly, a loud, aggressive pounding on his door shattered the silence. It wasn't Uraraka's soft tap or Ida's rhythmic knock. It was a frantic, angry hammering. Bang! 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 Izuku flinched violently, scrambling up into a sitting position, his heart leaping into his throat. "DKU!" Bakugo's voice. It was a raw, furious roar, muffled only slightly by the wood of the door. "I know you're in there, you damn nerd! I've had it with this ghost act. Everyone's walking on eggshells around you, whispering like you're going to break. Well, I'm sick of it." The pounding continued, each impact a physical blow to Izuku's frayed nerves. "Ah, the explosive one," Animus purred, a dark amusement coloring its tone. "He's come to challenge us. He still thinks he's the strongest. He is an insect roaring at a tidal wave. Open the door, Izuku. Let's correct his delusion." Permanently, a terrifyingly vivid image flashed through Izuku's mind, his hand, glowing with green light, phasing through the door and grabbing Bakugo by the throat. "No!" he gasped, scrambling backward, away from the door, as if it were on fire. "Stop hiding like a damn coward and fight whatever the hell is wrong with you, nerd!" Bakugo roared, his voice cracking with a strange mixture of fury and something else. Something that sounded almost like desperation. "You think I'd let some cheap Nako FF voice in your head beat you? Don't be pathetic. I'm the one who's going to beat you, so you better get your shit together." The words, so quintessentially Bakugo, so full of aggressive, violent rivalry, were the most profoundly supportive thing anyone had said to him all week. He wasn't telling Izuku it was okay. He wasn't telling him to rest. He wasn't pitying him. He was challenging him. He was acknowledging the fight. He had, in his own explosive way, seen the truth more clearly than anyone. Some cheap knockoff voice in your head. He knew it wasn't just Izuku. He was telling him to fight the real enemy. He was, in his own way, saying, "I'm still here. I'm still your rival. Don't you dare lose to anything but me." The unexpected, brutal honesty of it shattered something in Izuku. The dam of his control, which he had so painstakingly maintained, crumbled into dust. A strangled sob escaped his lips. He was still on the other side of the door. Safe. But the sentiment had breached his defenses completely. He could feel Animus raging against it, furious at this intrusion, at this unexpected reinforcement from the outside world. "Insolent child! He dares? He knows nothing of our power!" But for the first time in days, Izuku felt a flicker of his own strength. A tiny, defiant spark ignited in the cold darkness. Kaken was right. He was hiding. He was letting Animus win. The pounding stopped. There was a moment of silence, then a frustrated, angry sigh from the other side of the door. "Damn it, Deku!" Izuku heard the soft thud of Bakugo's forehead leaning against the door. The sound was surprisingly intimate, vulnerable. Then, the footsteps receded down the hall. He was alone again. He slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor, his back pressed against the cool wood where Bakugo's anger had just been. Tears, hot and silent, began to stream down his face. They weren't tears of despair this time. They were tears of a terrible, aching gratitude. He wasn't completely alone. Someone out there saw the monster, and they were still yelling at him to win the fight. But the brief flicker of hope was quickly extinguished by the overwhelming reality of his situation. He was too weak. He was too tired. The siege had worn him down to nothing. He buried his face in his knees, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs, and in his mind Animus, having weathered the brief storm of Bakugo's intrusion, began to laugh. It was a low, rumbling, triumphant sound, the laughter of a predator that knows its prey is finally, irrevocably exhausted. The vigil was over. The prisoner was broken. And soon, the cage would no longer be able to hold him.